What is up, everyone? My name is Evan Dammarrell, co-host of Locked On Cavs. Today, I am joined by Alex Wolfe, one of the hosts of Locked On Knicks, to check in on the ongoing series between Cleveland and New York and look ahead to the upcoming matchups at Madison Square Garden.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
As I said before, everyone, my name is Evan Dammarrell, and I'm joined by Alex Wolfe. But before we start, I just want to remind you that the Cavs do play the Knicks on Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Catch every basket of Cavs hometown broadcast featuring Tim Alcorn and Jim Jones on the SiriusXM app. Just search the SiriusXM app and then look up Cavs after you download it. Also, just want to thank you guys for making Locked On Cavs and Locked On Knicks your first listen every day. Both shows are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Both shows are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which, as you may know at this point, features your team every day. Alex, how you doing, man?
Not bad, all things considered. The Knicks kind of crapped the bed last night. But, a 1-1 series tie coming out of Cleveland, I think is about reasonably as good of an outcome as you can expect for a 5 seed versus a 4 seed. So I'm feeling all right. I just hope that I was hoping for a closer game in game 2, because I do feel like that was a sort of momentum shifting game where now you can't really hang your hat on like, oh, at least we played them tight for 2 games. Now it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we beat them in a tight game in game 1 and then got the doors absolutely blown off in game 2. Not the best outcome if you're the New York Knicks or a Knicks fan for that matter.
So it's interesting you note that. We can dive more into it as we look ahead to what game 3 and 4 holds in Madison Square Garden. But for game 1, I mean, if you're a Cavs fan, you thought the sky was falling, Rome was burning, Moondog, the mascot, was fiddling as watching Rome burn. But it was kind of surprising because the Knicks came into game 1 and they really out-hustled and they punched the Cavs in the mouth and kind of beat them at their own game, which is just being more physical, being more dominant on defense, and just doing a lot of just the little fundamental things that when you and I were just talking about the series heading in, or when Chris and Gavin were talking about the series heading in, like the most obvious thing was, hey, Mitchell Robinson is arguably the best offensive rebounder in the league, especially for his position. Josh Hart just has a nose for finding rebounds, especially just because the Knicks use him as a small ball 4, and they can utilize him just 1 through 3 in that regard too, just in defensive situations as well. And the Cavs kind of just let the Knicks do whatever they want and played Knicksian style basketball. And sure, Julius Randle wasn't 100%, but Julius Randle looked pretty solid, and I think frustrated Evan Mobley at times. Jalen Brunson, I was stunned that he was able just to have that dramatic swing in the second half, just after all the foul trouble he was in the first half. And you and I talked about this a lot, just in terms of just series predictions and things like that. But Josh Hart was a huge factor in game 1 for the Knicks. And I think if it wasn't for that ankle injury, he would have been the more dominant force for New York in both of these games, just because he was really giving it to the Cavs and just finding a way to frustrate Cleveland to the point where you're like, yeah, this is a dude you'd hate to face, but you'd love to have him on your team.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to make a difference the entire series. That's just kind of his brand of basketball, is being that glue guy, the guy that's going to basically hustle for every second that he's on the court. Now, obviously, he gave us a scare. I mean, we literally, thanks to the injury designation, we recorded a whole episode for the day of the game that was how do the Knicks adjust to a life without Josh Hart for a game? Because, he's such a huge part of what they do. And, instead then the doubtful designation changes to questionable, and then he ends up taking the floor and he looks basically totally fine in game 2. I mean, he's not going to be the problem at all. He's always going to give you exactly what he wants, or exactly what the team wants, and also guess what he wants, which is just out hustle everybody, get rebounds, generally make everybody's lives on the opposing team a living hell. But I think the more concerning thing for the Knicks in game 2, I thought their defense was actually I mean, not the worst. Like the Cavs shot making got a lot better, but the most concerning thing to me was that it was just like the Knicks found their old selves in a bad way. Like they found like early season Knicks and like last season Knicks where lack of shot making was infectious in a really bad way. And nobody could make anything. And of course the Cavs played really good defense on them too. They played really physical and, you know, sort of did their own thing to them. But it was so funny because like in the first like 5 minutes or so, I was thinking to myself, when the Knicks were up like 12-6 or whatever the score was at that particular moment, I was like, oh man, we might be working with something here. Like the Knicks kind of seem like they found something. Like they're doing the same stuff. Like Jalen Brunson was doing his quote unquote antics, which is, you know, like just playing a modern style of basketball and trying to draw fouls and stuff. And he got Okoro in foul trouble in the first couple seconds, you know, and you're just like, okay, all right, they're doing like the same stuff again. This seems great. And then all of a sudden the wheels just came off and it seemed like nobody could make anything. And that's a problem. Like the Knicks need to find a way to steel themselves against that. But it just always seems to happen like it's like contagious amongst them, more so shot missing than shot making sometimes, where all of a sudden the whole team just goes cold at once. And this has been a problem for like years and years, but something we haven't seen for at least the last few months. And it was unfortunate to see that kind of rear its ugly head again for the Knicks.
Do you think it was Cleveland maybe responding to the physicality? Because in game one, and that was just kind of the through line for the Cavs, like JP Bickerstaff's mentioned, just like, hey, the Knicks out hustled us and outworked us and just kind of hit us in a way that we weren't comfortable. Darius Garland just openly said like, hey, I didn't play well, but like the Knicks just kind of sucker punched us and we never really responded to it, other than Donovan Mitchell, who seemed to be kind of finding his way in this series. And then Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, like the list goes on and on. Like everyone agreed, like, yeah, the Knicks just kind of came into our house and punched us in the mouth and we just didn't have a response to them. And I agree. Like in the opening moments of the game, especially with Brunson getting Okoro in foul trouble, you're thinking like, oh boy, the Cavs didn't make any adjustments. They said all the right things, but they aren't going to do anything to fix it. But you kind of just notice like a switch flip almost, where the Cavs just said, okay, that's enough. We're going to just kind of bully the Knicks back a little bit and make them uncomfortable. So you're saying, like, I understand and I agree that New York was struggling to find just shot creation opportunities. They were making Jalen Brunson uncomfortable. I think they were just kind of daring guys like Emmanuel Quickley or RJ Barrett just to kind of beat them, and maybe even Julius Randle, who is functional as a player but isn't 100% out there as well. Like just basically, hey, we're going to try and cut the head off the snake a little bit here, and we're going to rough you up a lot along the way. Do you think that just kind of flustered New York a little bit, just because they weren't expecting Cleveland just to kind of come on so hard like that? And then just that shifted the momentum back in Cleveland's favor. Then Darius Garland just kind of probing New York's defense and just hitting a lot of just really, really, really crazy 3-point shots, just fully swung things back in Cleveland's favor. Like, I don't know. It's just interesting because New York kind of had a recipe for success in game one, and it felt like they were just rattled all of game two, and like they lost what worked for them in game one and just kind of threw things to the wayside.
Yeah, getting really physical with certain guys on the Knicks is like their kryptonite, which maybe doesn't seem like it would be the case given the fact that they obviously now have this sort of rep as like a physical team. And they're certainly always going to play that way on defense and stuff. But like Julius Randle, if you feed into his worst tendencies tell him to complain a lot and to want to be treated like a superstar. And if he feels like he's not getting the calls that a superstar gets, I mean, that was basically the story of all of last year. Was he was still putting up some decent counting stats and stuff, but he was just miserable to watch as a fan because he just, and I saw some of this come out last night where it was just like, all right, dude, like we get it. Like you're not getting foul calls, but like you got to kind of like just kind of buckle up. And, you know, I thought he mostly did a good job, but there was some points where he seemed kind of like some of his worst tendencies started coming out. And then that was where you started seeing like the wheels start to fall for the Knicks in general. I mean, I give all the credit to Jalen Brunson. I mean, he did a little bit of that as well, but not to the extent. But then the other guys on the team, it's just like, you know, yeah, you do need someone else to step up. I do think that the Knicks weren't entirely expecting that result from the Cavs as far as like just how physical they were. I thought that they sort of And look, I thought this too, based off the quotes coming out of Cleveland. I thought, oh, the Knicks are kind of in their head. Like they've kind of got this, like, because Cleveland after game one is going on and on about like, oh, they're so physical and this, that, the other. They're pulling antics and this, that, the other thing. And it's like, okay, I mean, maybe, but it seemed like they were just playing playoff basketball to me. And then Cleveland, it seemed like actually was very true to their word, where they were like, okay, well, if this is what's going to be acceptable in this series, then here we go. We're going to come out and play a different way in the second game. And they fully did that. And I do think they really took the Knicks off their rhythm quite a bit by doing that.
Well, we'll talk about more of that in a second, but speaking of the wheels falling off, if that happens to happen to your car, you should check out today's sponsor, eBay Motors, to fix it up. For a championship team like the Cavs or the Knicks, ensuring every player is a perfect fit, and it's the same way for your vehicle. Every part they just need to fit right. So head to eBay Motors next time you need parts and accessories. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Add your ride to My Garage and look for green check to know it will be part or it will fit with your car, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, bringing home a win is easy when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride, folks. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And we're back. Alex, tell me all about how Knicks fans can check out the Knicks broadcast on Sirius XM if they happen not to be in the market.
Yeah, well, the Knicks are playing the Cavs on Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And, if you want to get similar to what you get with Locked On, where you get a personalized experience just for your team. If you want to get that, you can get that from SiriusXM. Catch every quarter, every shot, everything of the Knicks hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Knicks.
And if you want to check out more before the game and you want to get more in depth with the Cavs or the Knicks, listen to Locked On Cavs or Locked On Knicks, because this is a crossover where Alex and I keep diving deeper into this current Eastern Conference playoff series between Cleveland and New York. And I just want to pick up right where we left off, and let's talk about adjustments, because it's clear Cleveland made some adjustments heading into Game 2. They punted on Ricky Rubio. They benched Dean Wade in favor of Jetty Osman, Karis LeVert, and Danny Green off the bench. JB Bickerstaff pulled the plug on Isaac Okoro and went with Karis LeVert for pretty much the entirety of the game. I believe he played almost 40 minutes in this one. What did you think of Cleveland just kind of making adjustments just to kind of probe and gauge what New York was throwing at them defensively compared to Game 1 to Game 2?
It was smart. I mean, they put more shooting on the floor. I think like Danny Green is like the ageless wonder, dude. Like I don't understand how this guy still just operates at the level that he does, like at whatever age he is. He's like 38. Like Danny Green's been playing basketball for forever, and putting him in there was smart. He made some shots. Osman I really like quite a bit. I think that the strategy was sound, which was essentially the one thing that you can get against the Knicks is 3-point shots. Like they're consistently under tips. They're not great at purely deterring teams from shooting threes. They're good at their best at deciding who gets to shoot threes. If the other team has a weak link, then they will find that weak link and they will let them shoot threes. And we sort of saw that with Okoro in Game 1, right? He went like 1 of 6. And LeVert also didn't shoot super well in Game 1, but obviously rebounded in a big way in Game 2, which was a danger that you take as the Knicks if you're leaving a guy like that open, because this is a guy that, for better or worse, has scored 50 points in his career. Like this dude can score. He can put points on the board. So like I didn't totally love the strategy from the Knicks, but I think the Cavs were pretty brilliant with the way that they played it, much as it pains me to admit. Like the way to beat the Knicks is just put as much shooting on the floor as possible. And if you're able to have guys at least on the Cavs from 1 to 4 that can shoot the 3, that's going to be enough to like, and we'll just assume for the sake of conversation that like Evan Mobley like could consistently shoot it, which I know is like still not totally in his bag yet, but like is enough in his bag that it can scare you. I think you're in good shape against the Knicks, because that's like the 4 spot really has killed them traditionally. or like the 5, like if God forbid you have a shooting 5, like the Knicks are screwed. Because that's always just been like one of those things that's like their big bugaboo is like they can't have Mitchell Robinson, whoever's playing center, out of the paint to cover a guy on the perimeter. But there's so few like true sharpshooting 5s that they have not had to deal with that too much. Outside of like the occasional like Miles Turner, like 7 for 7 from 3 game. But like if you can put shooting at least 3 out of 5 positions and then work your offense in such a way that you can find guys on the perimeter via pick and roll and stuff like that, like that's a definite weakness for the Knicks and definitely something that the Cavs took advantage of in that game.
And I'm just curious because I didn't notice, like, obviously New York made adjustments, but I think a lot of it was the Knicks were rattled just because, whether it's just the crowd, like the crowd on Tuesday was a lot more just boisterous. They're a lot louder, more engaged compared to the crowd on Saturday. Maybe it was just nerves across the board for both the players and the fans, but I'm curious to look at just like looking forward as we shift from Cleveland to New York. And it's funny because Darius Garland said, like, listen, nobody's rooting for us in New York. And my buddy Jesse, I texted him after Darius said that quote. And I said, hey, because he's a Cavs fan living in Manhattan. And I said, Darius doesn't think you're a real fan. He's just like, well, burning all my stuff. But for the most part, like, the Cavs are going into a hostile environment and they're not a good road team. They were 20-21 this season. And you had noted, like, the Knicks aren't great at defending home court sometimes, but Cleveland did struggle in the Garden this season as well. So for you, like, just as somebody who observes the Knicks and is obviously a lot more familiar with them, what adjustments did you see going from game 1 to game 2? And then to ape off that a little bit, what do you think New York can do from going to game 2 to game 3 to maybe stymie some of what Cleveland threw at them in game 2? Because, yeah, I'll be frank, the Cavs found a formula for success for game 2. They're going to mostly copy what they did in game 2 and apply it to game 3 with probably some minor alterations, but why try to fix something that clearly wasn't broken after you lock up your first win in this series?
Yeah, and I don't even know that they necessarily, like, I think it was mostly just that the Cavs made a great adjustment. You know, like switching their whole rotation around off the bench is pretty big. And that's a lot for like Tibbs to process. Tibbs is not a great in-game processor, which I think was demonstrated. Like, he didn't know that Cleveland was going to sit those guys, and therefore he assumed that they were going to play. And probably the rest of the team did too. But then once they weren't playing, and then all of a sudden Danny Green's playing and Shetty Osman is playing for longer, and, you know, like, you got these guys that you weren't expecting to see out there, and, like, you know, LeVert playing 40 minutes, like all this stuff. Like, I think that probably threw him for a loop to a degree. That said, like, again, I don't, like, if you look at like 107 points for as dominant as it felt like Cleveland was on offense is not that crazy in today's NBA. Like, that's still a decent number to hold a team to. It was mostly just that the Knicks, like, this is like a heavyweight fight. Like, I almost wonder if that's just what this whole series is going to be. Like, it was just like, it was like watching, like, I just recently finally watched the Creed movies, right? And like then watched, because I couldn't resist, watch some of the Rocky movies. And it's like, in those movies, it's just like this comical, like, semi-realistic interpretation of boxing, where it's just these guys throwing haymakers at each other, and you just hear, especially in the Rocky movies, like, oh yeah, you know, just like guys taking giant shots to the face, and, you know, like somehow being like, all right, I'm ready to go again, you know, like, and then going back. And that kind of feels like what this series is going to be like. Based off how things went game 1 to 2, it was like, okay, Knicks set the tone for physicality and for rebounding and for defense and what's going to be allowed. And then game 2, Cleveland said, okay, we're going to do that, but, you know, like, we're going to add like 10% to what the Knicks were just doing and see what we can get away with. And they got away with it. And now I feel like the Knicks, having home court advantage, then are going to go and be like, okay, well, now we're going to take it and we're going to put it at, you know, 10% more than that and see what we can get away with. But the Garden crowd will make a big difference. Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't think that should be understated. Like, the Knicks have solved some of their home woes this year. Like, they're definitely better. They were better, especially once they got like Josh Hart. Like, Josh Hart was a big catalyst all across the board, but they like finally started like really defending home court once they got him. And once he started giving that that energy that he gives, which is the sort of stuff the crowds feed off of, right? Like crowds don't want to watch a half court offense all day. They want to watch like transition dunks and fun stuff. And that's what gets the crowd really buzzing and in the game. And, you know, like good defense as well, like blocks and steals and stuff like that. That's what's going to get the crowd bumping. And the Knicks have that in spades. So, I mean, I think for all that they failed at in this game, I really think ultimately what it comes down to for them now is just don't get rattled by physicality again, and don't let it take you off your spots. You know, don't let it like affect you mentally to where then you can't make shots, because that was the biggest thing. I still think like the main thing in this game was just the Knicks went colossally cold as a team and just could not hit a single thing. And if a couple of those shots went down, maybe then they absorbed that physicality a little better, and all of a sudden they're like, no, we're still making shots. It's fine. We're good. You know, it's like, it's just one of those like collective hive mind effects that sometimes happens to a team where they just couldn't make anything. And then all of a sudden the game just went totally off the rails in that second quarter, and they were never able to get it back on the rails more than getting within like 18 or whatever. Which credit to the Cavs, they sort of had this collective hive mind of we can make all of our shots. So I think that's probably my biggest thing going into the next game.
It's interesting you note that, just because I am curious. Like, you look at the Knicks at face value, you're thinking like, okay, Emmanuel quickly hasn't done a ton in this series. Neither has Quentin Grimes. Like, RJ Barrett's shot just is not forming for him in a proper way, like that makes a meaningful impact. A lot of it is just Quentin Grimes and Julius Randle. And we're talking about how the Knicks maybe need a third guy to kind of emerge, just to be like that third star in this. But we can talk about that more in a second. But let's take a quick break for any of the local sponsors or just inserted sponsors in between, and we'll be right back with more of this Locked On Cavs, Locked On Knicks crossover. Thanks again to everyone for sticking around for this Locked On Cavs, Locked On Knicks crossover. And before we get back into the conversation, Alex and I both just wanted to tell everyone that the Knicks and the Cavs do play at Madison Square Garden on Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. You can catch every call of the Knicks or the Cavs hometown broadcast, which for the Cavs features Jim Jones and Tim Alcorn, and you just can find it all on the XXM app. Just search Knicks or Cavs on the app, depending on whatever home feed you want to listen to in this one. And it's interesting for me because I feel like in the Cavs' sake of things, Darius Garland really backed up a lot of what he said after game one, saying like, I need to be better and I need to do more, and like I need to be more aggressive on offense. And you could tell like he was kind of reading New York's defense a little bit and letting the shots come to him instead of pressing, where in game one it felt like he was pressing a little bit. Maybe there was that just game one nerves, like this is my first ever playoff game, like I got to make a statement kind of thing. And it devolved into, at least in game one, Donovan Mitchell just putting the team on his back offensively, and then it was just a case of too little too late, because the Knicks were kind of like a cat playing with their food for the majority of that game. But then you look at how Donovan Mitchell took like a secondary role and kind of acted as the facilitator and the creator for this team, and you see Darius Garland just come in here and do Darius Garland things and just looks like an all-star level point guard and like a really, really good co-star next to Donovan Mitchell. And you're thinking, okay, the Cavs have a lot of positive momentum heading into game three, but to your point with the Garden fan, just the crowd of the Garden, or just New York fans in general, or Darius Garland even noting like, hey, it's going to be chaotic, like no one in New York is rooting for us, like we have to just kind of internalize and not let the big picture impact us. We're talking about X factors heading into this series, and I know I had mentioned just like Isaac Okoro or Karis LeVert. I think for me now at this point, it's Darius Garland, because if he continues just this level of play, and if him and Mitchell are able to just figure out this Thunder and Lightning dynamic that they have going, whether one of them is handling a lot of the offensive creation, but they're able to just feed off the gravity of one another, because the Knicks are going to have a hard time containing both of them, or if Karis LeVert's on the floor with them too, like it's going to be even harder to contain those three. And as you had noted, just like the shooting edge the Cavs can kind of insert into the rotation does make things a little bit more chaotic, but Garland was masterful in game two for me. And I know I'm probably waxing a little bit too much poetic here on the Cavs side of things, but like he was just really good. And I'm curious to see how he looks in game three, because if he carries this momentum that he has from game two, like Cleveland could feel a little bit better about their chances, despite the fact that this is a hostile environment, and no one in the Garden wants to see the Cavs win, maybe except my friend Jesse, if he's able to sneak in a ticket, despite how expensive nosebleeds are.
Yeah, they certainly are. Yeah, you ain't in Cleveland anymore when it comes to ticket prices in New York.
Yeah, nosebleeds in Cleveland were $38 for game 2. And then he told me how much nosebleeds were in the Garden. I'm just like, holy cow.
Yeah, only like a cool $500 or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I can't believe we went this far without talking about Garland yet, to be completely honest, at least not in depth. Like, I totally agree with you. I think that he picked the Knicks apart. I got to give credit, you sort of referenced the tandem, but I got to give credit to the tandem of him and Mitchell too, because I thought that Mitchell had a visible gear shift in this game of being like, okay, I'm no longer going to be the primary scoring option. I got to get everybody else going if we're going to succeed. And he used the attention that the Knicks were giving him to then set up his teammates and, also empowered Garland to run more offense and create more offense for himself. Whereas I felt like, I'd be lying if I said I watched it as in depth as you probably did in the first game, as far as like how the offensive dichotomy was. I was kind of just sort of like, did they stop them? Did they not stop them? But it seemed to me in the first game, like Garland was doing a lot of like off ball stuff. Like he was not initiating very often and was finding himself in like spot up situations a lot and stuff, where he's kind of more like Brunson ish, although Brunson actually does quite well in spot up situations. But he does really well if you just put the ball in his hands and you're like, okay, dude, like go figure something out, and like you can go and cross somebody up and get a step back 3 or whatever. And like that's what really like gets the juices pumping for him, obviously. And you could see it, like he visibly looked more happy and like more like engaged in this game. Like he was like really enjoying himself, absolutely decimating the Knicks. And like I think that's going to be key for them, is like embracing Garland as much as possible on offense. And because Mitchell is so talented that he can sort of just do whatever, like he can be a spot up guy. He could be an assist man. And that's why you traded like that big package for him that the Knicks weren't willing to give up, and I still stand by. I don't think the Knicks necessarily should have gone for that, because I think that they're way further along than we figured they would be this year. But like, that's why you pay a premium for a dude like that, and why the Knicks will probably look to pay a premium for a dude like that at some point, because you need that guy that can just like do whatever is needed. If you need him to set things up, he can set things up. But if you need him to just go out there and get you the bucket, he could do that too. And in many ways, that is Jalen Brunson, to give him credit too. But like, I thought Garland just, again, there's only so many ways to put it, but like he picked them apart. He was, they were running lots of pick and rolls, and he was just like taking advantage of many of the same things that Mitchell took advantage of in game 1. It's just like, oh, you're not going to cover me? Okay. Like over the screen, like fine. Then I'll just shoot a 3 and I'll make it. And you're just going to have to deal with that. But yeah, on top of that, even just having like Evan Mobley had a much better game this time around, shooting 6 of 11, like he's still 13 points doesn't look that great on the surface, but he was way more efficient, which was super important. I felt like they got Jared Allen more involved as a result of having like both Mitchell and Garland handling the ball more and having it be less ISO ball. So I just think like the decision to have, if it was a conscious decision and not something that just happened in game flow, but however that came to be, of Mitchell distributing more and not being as much the focal point, like the alpha and omega of the offense, that was, I think, really one of the biggest keys to me.
And it's interesting you mentioned just like Mitchell maybe taking more of a reserve role in this game, but he shared with the media leading up to game 2 that he pulled Garland aside after game 1 and just like the two of them just like had like a serious sit down, like heart to heart. They have a big brother, little brother situation between the two of them, and he just said like, listen, this is what New York is doing to me in like pick and rolls, or this is how they're defending me, and like I noticed they're doing this to you. He's just like, let me kind of just do a couple things to make it easier for you. But he's like, when you have the ball and like you have these opportunities, I want you to shoot it. I want you to go. Like Darius sometimes is a little too unselfish when it comes to his playmaking, where he would rather just rack up 20-30 assists instead of, like, I remember once his career best game, I think he scored like 48 or so points, and the Cavs lost. And they said like, oh, how does it feel to win this? He's like, I could care less. We lost. Like, I'd rather win. Like, I could score like 10 less points if that meant we won the game. So that's just how he's wired. And I think sometimes like Darius just likes to probe the defense. He likes to figure things out. Maybe game 1 was a bit of a feeling out process for him, because I don't want to say like he's entirely reliant on Donovan Mitchell to like to tell him what to do. But you had mentioned just like getting Mobley more involved. Like I think Mobley and Allen especially, like their primary focus was just limiting offensive, at least second chance scoring opportunities off offensive rebounds, because the Cavs gave up 13 offensive boards in this game, but they limited the second chance scoring chances for the Knicks. And you also notice just like the Cavs in general crashing the glass a lot more and just kind of limiting like Josh Hart or even Julius Randle or Mitchell. Like it's hard to contain the Knicks, but like the Cavs made a more concerted effort to limit those opportunities. And like you even saw Danny Green defending Randle well. But back to the just getting this core four more involved, like Mobley's more involved in that. He was super efficient. I agree with you. Like this was a much better game for him. And I think just kind of goes understated. And it's just the Evan Mobley process where he tries to find himself, but he'd rather just do the little things that ensures a win. So I think the 13-13 is a victory in of itself. Just you take that if you're Evan Mobley. But the play that like really stuck out for me was Garland was off ball, and you had noted this, and I think it was an adjustment just off the fact that in game one, New York was making an effort to double or at least trap Garland as soon as he crossed the timeline, and then they were denying Donovan Mitchell the ball too. Just like it was really well drawn up defense by Tibbs just to ensure that Garland was flustered and then he couldn't dump it off to his security blanket in Mitchell, and then like the offense just kind of fell apart. But in this game, like you saw a lot of Mitchell initiating the offense with Garland playing off ball, and like the best example of just the Cavs kind of figuring out a little bit of what New York was, or at least how New York is defending them, is the Knicks then go and try to double Mitchell, who then dumps it to Jared Allen, who's at the top of the key. You see the Knicks then collapse on Jared Allen, and Darius Garland's just wide open at the top of the perimeter, and he just holds his hand up, and Allen just kicks it right back out to him, and Garland gets a wide open three that he hits with confidence. And that was one of those plays where you're like, okay, the Cavs are playing a little bit differently. They understood the assignment. They broke down the film. Like the guys are backing up a lot of what they said. And if Darius Garland can keep this up, I'm curious to see what adjustments New York does. Maybe they go back to a little bit more of what worked in game one, and with the luxury of home court and just kind of being in the safer confines at home in general, like you feel a little bit more at ease, maybe doing some of this stuff. But I agree with like just your initial point too. Like this is a heavyweight match between two teams that are just going blow for blow with one another. And I'm curious what 10% more for New York is going to be than if Sunday's game is 10% more from Cleveland, or maybe 5% more from New York. And then you see back in Cleveland on Wednesday, 15% more from Cleveland. Like this could be a bit of a grind out. And I know you said Knicks in 7. I said Cavs in 6. I think I'm going to stick by my pick of Cavs in 6 in this one, but I know it's not a hot take, but I have a feeling that whoever wins game 3 very well could win this series overall, just because the Cavs have a ton of momentum. And if New York comes in and just beats the crap out of them, like that's just going to stall them. And like, they're going to spiral a little bit heading into a matinee game on Sunday. Yeah,
it is really important, that the Knicks win this next game, I think, because again, like I said at the open, like, this game was not what the Knicks needed. Like they did not need to get blown out. They needed to just be competitive. Like if you go home tied 1-1, that's fine, but you can't go home tied 1-1 doubting yourself. You know what I mean? Like you should be hanging your hat on that. Like we managed to snatch a game on the road. We have home court advantage now as long as we protect home court, and we can close the series in game 6 at home. But if they don't take care of business and this thing goes, they lose this game, even saying they win game 4, and this goes back to then it's just a 3-game series. And then everything starts fresh again at game 5. And then it's just game 5 at Cleveland, game 6 at New York, game 7 at Cleveland. And then you're right back in the same place you were at the beginning.
Yeah.
So they've really got to take care of home court here. But that starts with game 3, and they can't let this like fluster them. And they started to look a little flustered. And this is a team that has some flusterable dudes on it, but also has some very stalwart guys. Like Julius Randle is the main one. Honestly, I hate to keep pointing him out, but like he's easily flustered sometimes, and sometimes it gets to him. He took on this whole new like Zen yoga approach this year, to like how he looks at life and basketball and everything else. And like he's going to need to center himself. Yeah, Jalen Brunson is going to need to keep everybody calm because he's the most playoff tested guy on this roster at this point. And then the young guys still, I mean, the Knicks, we didn't touch on it a ton, but like the same guys for the Knicks that didn't do a ton in the first game, didn't really do anything in the second game either. Like Emmanuel Quickley was a little better, but still didn't make nearly the impact you want. But Quentin Grimes was pretty invisible on offense, and RJ Barrett was very inefficient, was kind of hijacking at times. Like they got some stuff to figure out, and it probably mostly doesn't revolve around Randall and Brunson. And yet it's also going to be up to Randall and Brunson to be the leaders the team needs. I'm really intrigued to see how they handle going back home and the pressures that come with that, and also how Tibbs adjusts. Because, as I said, like Tibbs is a great game-to-game adjuster, not a great in-game adjuster. So he's going to need to come out with a great game plan like he did in game one, or else the Knicks are just going to be behind the eight ball this whole game again if he gets out coached during the game again. So we'll see how it all goes, but it's going to be an intriguing game three. And as you said, potentially a tone setter for the rest of the series.
Before we head out of here, just to touch on the young Knick guys, and between just like Grimes, Barrett, and even Quickly, like of those three, because we had touched on just like the Knicks maybe needing somebody else to emerge from the group just to support Randall and Brunson a bit. Just of those three, who do you think is the most likely to do so in game three?
Quickly. I think it's Quickly. If there's one guy on the Knicks that feeds the most off the Garden crowd, I think it's him. I mean, he loves playing in Madison Square Garden, and he loves the bright lights, and he loves cannon a three and making the place just erupt. And he seems to just live for those moments. He also lives at his best for snatching the souls of a team on the road too. But he is made for Madison Square Garden. And he, like I said, he sort of got back on the right path, and they made a concerted effort, especially once things were out of hand down the stretch of game two, to get him more involved and start getting him like the reps that he's going to hopefully need to like start contributing better. If he can come out and feel himself again on the Garden floor, he's going to be the guy. He'll be the third guy to step up for the Knicks, I think.
Well, I think that's why he is likely going to win Sixth Man of the Year too. Just like he is that dude in New York, and here's hoping. But I have been surprised that Emmanuel Quickley just hasn't emerged quite as much. But I agree, getting those reps down the stretch in game two, despite it being over pretty quickly, or not pretty quickly, but over before the final buzzer rang, could be a bit of a difference maker for New York in this one. But as we get out of here, I just want to thank the dedicated listeners for both Locked On Cavs and Locked On Knicks for making our shows their first listen every day. After Friday's game on the Locked On Cavs side of things, Chris and I will be doing a full recap and analysis of this third act in this best of 7 series title fight between New York and Cleveland. Alex, what do you and Gavin have going on your end?
I will actually be off for Friday's game. So Gavin, I believe, has secured a guest in my stead to cover the game. So Gavin will have you covered on Locked On Knicks as well, and a podcast out on Saturday morning in your feeds, just like we do all the time, because we're always here 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. You never know around this time of year. So thank you everybody for listening. And I'm sure you'll be hearing plenty more from both of us, and hopefully some more crossovers too. Because I got to say, I've been loving these periodic crossovers, man. You guys are great.
I have too. No, this has been delightful. You, Gavin, Chris is all right, but you guys are great. So this has been fun. Yeah, we'll definitely have to do more crossovers, just even general NBA stuff. If we just want to pick each other's brains and just on the takes of how things are going. But guys, if you're on Locked On Cavs, check out Locked On Knicks to get a full understanding of what New York has going on in this series. We have seen a ton of Knicks fans in our comments on YouTube, and just the occasional review saying that they've been listening to Locked On Cavs. So we appreciate the little love from the New York way coming our way. So until next time, I'm Evan. That's Alex. This is Locked On Cavs. He is Locked On Knicks, and we will be back on Saturday morning.